All right, it's official. The Texans are a player. They have been as aggressive as they've been in a long time, and going out and seeking what they need on this team. It was a dicey first, what, 6 to 12 hours of free agency, and then day two they got started. They traded for Joe Mixon. They got Danielle Hunter. You start to look at where the holes are on this roster, and there are fewer and fewer spots. But there's still spots, and I think we'll just jump right in since I know I've been off of YouTube, focused on my real job for a while. Uh, just with what just happened, Malik Collins traded to the San Francisco 49ers. Kind of a confusing scenario when you find out that they got a 7th-round pick for Malik Collins. And I think a lot of it just speaks to the re-engineering of the defensive line in total. They're going to save like $2.5 million on this trade. On the cap. They're going to take a $10 million dead hit. So it's not like this was all about money. But I do think that philosophically, in terms of maybe the type of player or type of defensive lineman that DeMeco Ryans really wants, Malik may have been a little bit more on the pass rush side of things and less on the run side of things, on the run stopping side of things. It makes you wonder what might happen with Eric Armstead, because Eric Armstead obviously played for DeMeco Ryans with the 49ers. He's a big physical dude, not super fast or athletic in that regard, but just flat out gets the job done. He's been banged up the last couple of years, and he had knee surgery at the end of the season. So something might happen while I'm on here with you guys, or something might not happen for a while. I think I'll pull up the depth chart here in a little bit, and you'll be able to see just how different this team is defensively. And DeMeco said they were going to start with the front seven. And if we look at the defensive line as it stands right now, let me pull up the depth chart. Let's see. Like, he's spent on defense. There we go. All right. So this is the RLED's depth chart. Look along the left here, and you've got your starters. As of right now, this has Fatukasi at left defensive tackle. It has Danico Autry as a backup defensive end. Danico Autry is very versatile. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's a 3-4 defensive end. So in a 3-4, that's like an interior defensive lineman, except he's also very capable at rushing on the edge. I think they're going to be very flexible with those guys. There might be games where Danico Autry starts at defensive tackle. There might be other games where he starts at defensive end, just depending on the game plan and who's there available. Danielle Hunter, we'll get into. Aziz Al-Shayer. It's hard to pronounce if you look at the word. The actual proper pronunciation is it's actually Al-Shayer or Al-Shire, but it's not Al-Shahir as you might think by the spelling of it. Cornerback, where right now they've got Jeff Okudah slotted in there on the R-Lads. I don't think it's going to be Okudah to begin the season. Steven Nelson is still out there and available, and it might end up being Steven Nelson. I don't know. I feel a lot better about this defense than I did just 48 hours ago. The Danielle Hunter signing and swapping him for Jonathan Grenard, if you look at the contracts, Danielle Hunter, 2 years, $49 million, $48 million of that is guaranteed. There's some roster bonuses snuck in there with that extra $1 million. But it's a lot of guaranteed over the course of 2 years. I think that this is the first evidence we've seen of a guy who has come to the Texans, and maybe, according to Ian Rappaport, he took less money than he had offers elsewhere. I would imagine that as he enters his 30-year-old season here, I think he's probably gotten a couple offers for 3 or 4 year deals where maybe there was more total guarantees. But this is 2 years, virtually all guaranteed, and he'll still be a young man when he's a free agent. But I don't think he signs with the Texans. I don't think he signs that deal with the Texans if he doesn't, A, trust that they're going to be a competitive football team, B, that he doesn't have a lot of good vibes about, if he didn't have a lot of good vibes about DeMeco Ryans, and C, he's from Katy. I mean, that helps out a lot too. A lot of questions about whether he'll wear 99 or not. For one, I think that JJ, who has voiced a lot of respect for Danielle Hunter, like during this last season, called Danielle Hunter out as a guy who's having an underrated, awesome season. I think JJ would be cool with it. I think Danielle Hunter would be cool with it. But at high school and in the NFL, he wore number 94. And as of right now, so if Khalil Davis is cool with giving up number 94, maybe for a small donation or something to a charity of his choice, then I bet we'll see Danielle Hunter wearing 94. I don't really care. I think he'll wear 99. Like if you look at it like the number 88 with the Cowboys, where okay, it's a number of notoriety and only certain guys are allowed to wear it. I'd be cool with that. Danielle Hunter's totally that guy. The contract that Grenard got and the loss that you get with Grenard, I like it's hard to compare these two, and I very much favor having Danielle Hunter on the roster than Jonathan Grenard. I don't want to make it sound like I'm bashing Jonathan Grenard or anything, but Danielle Hunter, in terms of total productivity, it's his average year is still much more productive than any season Jonathan Grenard has ever had. So Grenard has upside and Grenard has potential, but it's been one really genuinely good season out of Grenard. And even that, when you look at like total QB pressures, he had 42 QB pressures last year. Danielle Hunter typically gets 70 to 80 QB pressures in a season. The other thing too is that Danielle Hunter plays like 90% of the snaps, and Grenard has been more of a rotational player, which is fine. Like that's the way a lot of teams do it. But Grenard would play like 55 to 60% of the snaps, whereas Danielle Hunter is just a workhorse out there. He had over 1,000 snaps last year. So I think he's more of your like solid, dependable. You got him for 2 years, maybe extend him after that or what have you. But like this dude is serious. Like this guy is for real as a pass rusher. You put him opposite of Will Anderson, and it's just tough to figure out, exactly where you slide the protection. So that part of it is just awesome. I could not be happier about A, the fact that they got Danielle Hunter, but B, the fact that you didn't have to trade for him like perhaps Brian Burns. And, frankly, Brian Burns was going to be a hefty contract that I don't think he could have gotten on this 2-year deal. Like that part of it is huge because Nick's doing that thing where you're being aggressive, you're improving the team, but you're not hamstringing yourself down the line if things don't work out. Eric Armstead, I'm cautiously waiting to see. You guys might have there might be news on him already. As far as we've been discussing this. If you just jumped on Riverbend, it's going to be for a 7th round pick, and it looks mostly to be probably a combination of saving some salary to make more moves. It's only like a $2.5 million net gain on the cap, but I also think that some of the guys out there, including Fadikasi, the defensive tackle they got from Jacksonville, he's a big body dude. He's 320 plus pounds. I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on stopping the run with the guys up front, making it a little bit easier for your linebackers to be able to play linebacker and to not have to just One problem the Texans had this year with their linebackers was that those dudes were all about stopping the run, but sometimes way too much so, and it hurt them on play action. And there's times where I think even I was maybe a little too harsh on the safeties at times, just because the linebackers were too far up and they were too aggressive versus the run, and they were not getting the depth they needed on their drops. That makes it a lot tougher for everybody. I think Alshire and an emerging Christian Harris hopefully go a long way in making that better this year. Johnny Newton is the other defensive tackle that in the draft, he's starting to be my favorite guy. I don't think Byron Murphy will probably be available. I don't know if Byron Murphy also has perhaps the bulk or heft or run stopping ability in the NFL, or might not project to that the same way what D'Amico would want. But I don't know. Like, he's so electric athletically and can make things happen that I don't know if that ends up being a factor if he falls all the way to 23. But Johnny Newton be the guy right now that maybe they're keeping an eye on him. I don't think you get rid of Malik Collins thinking we're going to draft the guy specifically, but they've got options now along the defensive line. Is there one more thing about the defensive line that I want to address before I take some questions was Clowney. Somebody said, speaking of Clowney, this morning they asked, is Clowney still available? He is available. Last year he signed with the Ravens in August on a 1-year deal. I'll be surprised if Clowney signs before August. Or let's say June or July. I think Clowney wants to have his offseason to himself. unless somebody jumps in with huge money or anything, he might already be figuring, all right, like, well, I'll wait and see what happens with the Ravens and sign back there. I would totally be on board with having Clowney here. I think any bad blood or whatever else is water under the bridge, because that was Bill O'Brien. Casario wasn't even here yet. Jack Easterby, none of the coaches are the same. I think, yeah, I'd be all for Clowney. I think that, and I'll tell you, to be completely transparent, because I don't want anybody to accuse me of hypocrisy. Not me, Seth Payne. I would not have been totally on board with signing Clowney to this team last week. I do feel all of a sudden looking at this, let me look at this again. Looking at this depth chart, and if you look at just the addition of Alshire, Danielle Hunter, you don't have Malik Collins anymore, but you have Danico Autry, the maturation of Will Anderson. I feel like they have a strong enough culture that you can have a few guys that might be a little bit space cadetish, which is like the whole purpose, right? It's one thing that's always bothered me sometimes when people like Bill O'Brien take the football character thing a little too far, is that I 100% agree that you got to have salt of the earth, leadership, team captain type dudes on a football team. If you shoot to have nothing but team captains, you kind of got to wonder, like, okay, well, what's the purpose in having any leadership at all? Like if I'm going to have strong leaders on my team, I also want them to then potentially be the guys that help have a guy like Jadeveon Clowney on your team, or to have other guys like, Lonnie Johnson's coming back into the fold, Lonnie Johnson was the first public signing the Texans made, and that was one of the reasons people were freaking out, as all the other people were going off the board. I get it. But if you're going to have those leaders on the team, it should theoretically allow you to have some of the guys that maybe need a little bit more leadership. So I don't worry as much about this team right now, especially with D'Amico having established himself as who he is, with Will Anderson being the natural leader he is, CJ Stroud just being himself. I think they can start to withstand a few things, which, look, honestly takes us into Joe Mixon, who's been nothing but a solid citizen on his football team. We'll get to that. We'll talk about it a little bit. But let me give you a couple. Let me grab a couple, because I saw some Chase Young questions and defensive line. So sticking with the defensive line for a little bit, I heard that Chase Young is going to the Titans just a couple minutes ago. Oh, okay. Interesting. Despite the limited, physiologically, there's very few people that compare to Chase Young. Chase Young had a chance to go to San Francisco, to a title contender, and maybe cleanse his image a little bit in just spending a half season there. And he spent that half season with a title contender, and basically people still wonder, all right, just how motivated is this guy? Just how checked in is he all the time? I would say good luck to the Tennessee Titans if that's where Chase Young goes. I'll say good luck to you then. Do you think the Texans will go after Chase Young? I don't think so. I think right now another team's gonna, whether it's the Titans or somebody else, I think they're gonna give more than the Texans would want to see, like on a prove it deal. Let's see. Al-Shahir sits back and crushes people when he needs to. Super sticky tackles. Super sticky tackles. I like that, Brandon. Super sticky tackles. And and again, just like I said with Grenard, I'm going to compare guys here, and it doesn't mean that I'm like slamming the guy that just left the Texans, because I like Blake Cashman a lot. I think when you watch Al-Shahir and Cashman play, they both have a lot of attributes, and Cashman is just a hell of an athlete, just a silky smooth and fluid athlete. But Aziz plays old school linebacker in a lot of ways. Like, he hits people in the mouth. He can sidestep a block, or he can just rip through an offensive guard and stick somebody. He also is much, much better, I think, than any of the current Texans at identifying play action, the run pass keys, all those things. You think about the Texans playing the Colts this year. It was a huge issue with the linebackers not recognizing or getting their keys on the RPOs. I think Al-Shahir is exactly the reason you bring him in. And plus, he's got experience with D'Amico. He was a linebacker for D'Amico. He was their Sam backer, which in that defense, they've kind of just rotated various random guys in through at Sam and still been good as long as they had Greenlaw and Fred Warner. When Greenlaw got injured a couple years ago, though, Alshire filled in for him, was calling plays on defense. That's another reason I think he's important for this defense. Christian Harris has a lot of potential, but D'Amico himself said that last year was kind of like his rookie year. Like Christian Harris, I think at this point in his development, needs to be able to just play downhill, play football, take in the keys that he needs to, but he doesn't need the extra responsibility of being the play caller, of having the speaker in his headset and all of that. It's just, that's a whole lot more mentally. Alshire has already proven that he can do that. Maybe over the course of the next couple of years, then they can bring him along with that. All right. If we drafted Devondre Sweat, could he lose like 30 pounds to be a run stuffer for us? We don't need him to be three. I know. We don't need him to be 366. Nobody really needs him to be 366. I think the big question around Devondre Sweat is simply like, can he not be 366? Like what can he actually sustain himself at in a city that throws avocados at diners like they're nickels? We can't get enough of the avocado and its tasty paste, the guacamole. So for me, it helped me. When I came from Jacksonville, I was a 4-3 defensive tackle. Like I played one season. I decided to go lighter. I was 285. I come to Houston, all of a sudden I'm going to be a nose tackle in a 3-4. And I kind of thought about like, how am I going to gain that weight? And then I started eating Tex-Mex 3 times a day. I lived in the Rice Lofts that second year, and there's a Chipotle, or at least there used to be, right in the lobby of that building. That was it. That was all I needed. I needed a Chipotle in the lobby of my building. I know, don't get offended, people, about Chipotle versus actual Tex-Mex and everything. It's the guacamole. They never asked me if I knew that it was extra that for guac. I obviously knew that it was extra for guac. I think Sweat is better off playing nose tackle for somebody. Fatu is our extra run stuffing D tackle right now. Yeah, Fatu's easier than Fatukasi to remember. Yeah, Devondre Sweat, man, I'd be surprised if the Texans took him. I think he's going to be really good in certain schemes or just playing nose tackle or what have you. I think D'Amico wants a little bit more versatility. My God. Okay, so let's get to the running backs because you guys have a lot of good comments on all of this. Eric Armstead, for anybody who just joined us, unless there's news on Eric Armstead, I think they're going to wait because Armstead was injured. At the very least, I think teams are going to want to have a look-see at him. So I didn't think he was going to be like a day one signing, even if the 49ers release him or whatever they do. It'll be pending physical because he's been banged up the last couple of years. The other thing too, right now, as we head into running back, is I think Nick has done a really good job so far in getting like guys that I feel comfortable that these guys are going to come in and contribute, you know? I just want to look up one thing about Joe Mixon before I talk about him. Yeah, Joe Mixon's 27. This will be his 28-year-old season. If you look at who the Texans have added between Danielle Hunter, who will be in his 30s, Joe Mixon, who's got tread off his tires as a running back, but is still, I think he's the same guy he's been. I don't think you need to worry about him. But then you have Jimmy Ward in the secondary, who's in his 30s. Who am I blanking? There's one other older guy that they brought in. Regardless, well, Danico Autry. That's right, Danico Autry. This depth chart's annoying me because it's got him in a different spot. Danico Autry's 34 or turning 34. I'm starting to get a little bit nervous that, all right, if we start bringing more and more guys that are in their 30s, that's a recipe for disaster. Because if you're depending on 10, 30-year-olds, I feel like you're going to lose at least half of them. And I want to be sure that the roster is resilient enough to withstand that. The defensive tackle position at this point is still relatively young, depending on if you're calling Danico Autry a tackle or a defensive end, I don't know. But that's just the biggest thing that would concern me. As far as Joe Mixon, a couple things make me feel good about Joe Mixon and his ability to produce right away. One is he's coming from a system that does a lot of similar things to this system. He's been successful and productive in multiple different systems. So I don't think you have to worry one bit about some kind of Dameon Pierce dynamic. where all of a sudden he's not ready to play or doesn't grasp the system. The other part of it, and I know we got to get to the off-field stuff, but on-field, Bill Lazor, who's the special assistant offensively, he was the offensive coordinator for the Bengals in Joe Mixon's first 2 years. So, Bill was there and would have seen Joe Mixon when everything was really fresh and people were wondering and worrying about his off-field incidents and exactly what that might mean, as well as, him maturing into a football role. And so he had Mixon's first big breakout year. His second year was with Bill Lazor. So I think Bill Lazor's got a familiarity with him and a comfort level, maybe for both the on-field and off-field stuff. Third football strictly, is that amongst running backs who have had at least 1,600 carries in their career since the year 2000, he has the fewest fumbles amongst them. And that's out of some 40 or so guys, like a pretty big list of players. He has fumbled the fewest amongst any of them. And on a per carry basis, it's also very, very good. So ball security, even though it's nothing glamorous or sexy to talk about, I think when you've got a young quarterback, like as many things as you can do to make his life easier, like not fumbling away series, that's nice. The other stat in his favor, we'll lump this into the third category, is just his extra yards over expected on catches. He's top 5 in the league last year amongst running backs. So I think a sometimes underutilized but very capable receiver out of the backfield, and I think that's something that CJ is going to work on. So I feel good about that. As far as Joe Mixon's off-field issues, it's complicated. He, and I've read more about him than I had in a while. You going back to his incident in Norman when he punched a young woman in the face as they were having a physical altercation. I think that after having read a statement by the young woman herself who got together and talked to Joe Mixon about it without attorneys present after after there was a civil settlement and everything. It does feel like I can dismiss something that he did when he was a teenager, given that he seems to have genuinely reached out and made efforts to be involved in the community, to be a good teammate, all of those things, that there was a reconciliation of sorts with that young woman. But then, and everything was kind of smooth sailing for a while. And then all of a sudden this last year, a couple incidents pop up where one, he was accused of threatening a woman in a traffic incident, went to court. He was found not guilty. So whatever the Texans did to look into that, however they feel about that, I beyond what the initial reports were, I don't think you can skewer a guy for something that he was found not guilty for, even though it's a lot of extra smoke. Then there was another incident where his sister was involved in a shooting incident, and it happened at his house, but he wasn't involved. Does mayhem seem to follow him around? I don't know. I'm going to say that with the Texans, they have been so careful in the past that I don't think that they're just going to jump to, without looking into a situation like this without having assured themselves. And I feel like for a team, there's been criticism of the Texans for a long time for not taking a chance on character risks, and for having the lowest arrest rate amongst NFL teams year after year after year. I don't know if that's held up for the last couple of years, but I feel like they've earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that. And the one incident of him actually putting his hands on a woman that we know of happened a long time ago. For whatever it's worth, and I don't this gets dicey when you start trying to categorize things. It was all bad. It was a bad situation, but it wasn't a domestic violence situation. Still a very, very bad situation, but it wasn't domestic violence, and it happened when he was a teenager. So there we are with that. I'd be curious if let me see with you guys if anybody's flipping out over them signing Joe Mixon, excuse me. Yeah, not really, huh? Okay, so I think we're on board there, right? The Texans have earned the benefit of the doubt. Somebody this morning said that it was the same as, this is what I object to. He said it was the same as the Astros when they signed Osuna. That was much different in a lot of ways, I think, because A, like that incident had just happened. B, it had happened. It was a domestic violence situation with a guy who did it as an adult and had just recently done it, or excuse me, was alleged to have done it just recently. And with Joe Mixon, it's been a lot of time that's passed since then, with a lot of good citizenship. Let me get your. I like the thing I like about YouTube is that you guys just start carrying on your own conversations, and where I know I can tell that I'm just background noise at times, so you guys can have your debate on here. And I actually like that because it takes some of the pressure off me. I feel like I could just sit and read your text out loud. He needs to sweat 50 pounds and he'll be fine. Devondre Sweat. DJ Reader hurt. Oh, so if anybody was asking about DJ Reader, yeah, DJ's hurt both quads in the last few years, like pretty notable quad injuries, and he's in his 30s. I don't think he's. I think he might be a little bit on the beefy side for what D'Amico's looking for, but don't get me wrong. Like he still provides a lot of presence as a pass rusher. He collapses the pocket. I love DJ Reader as a player. Like as a former nose tackle myself, I can watch a lot of the stuff that DJ Reader does, and I think appreciate just how hard it is in a way that not a lot of people can. There's times where he's up on one leg taking on a combo block and like doing everything he can to maintain his gap so he can help out the linebackers, and then he's freaking awesome. Just given the fact that the Texans have a few guys they've just signed who are in their 30s, that Jimmy Ward is already on the team and his age has been an issue. Like I'm a little bit nervous or hesitant to sign DJ Reader because I think he'll probably get a pretty good contract, and he deserves it. It's just a little dicey right now. We'll get into the safety in a little bit. So I see a few of you have mentioned that. Armstead and Rankins on the cheap DT Infinity Gauntlet poof. I don't know what that means. I wouldn't mind him coming back. Texans need to trade for the Bengals receiver. T. Higgins. I don't know about that. The T. Higgins thing. Okay, so if we go, T. Higgins is or really basically trading for anybody at this point. I'd rather get him in the draft. And this wide receiving group in the draft is supposedly one of the best all time, and that's after there have been a couple years now where a boatload of wide receivers have been taken in the first couple rounds. So within like 2 years ago and 4 years ago, it seems like every other year there's a wide receiver thing going on. I'm all for drafting a wide receiver. I think when you have your two starters, that third guy is he can only be a hindrance at times if he's already a veteran guy. And like I think the Texans can develop somebody young from within. Remember Noah Brown, and I know like Noah Brown isn't somebody that you just get internally excited about or anything, but he does have a knack for getting open when these other guys are on the field in this offense. So I think Noah Brown has a lot of value there. Maybe more so than we really want to acknowledge because he was just unheralded coming out of Dallas. And he comes in here and breaks off a couple of records, in a couple of consecutive weeks. But other than that, I think he's a guy that's more a beneficiary of Tank Dell and Nico Collins. So if T. Higgins, like you'd have to pay T. Higgins too. And I think right now, whatever you got earmarked for that position, let's save that for Nico Collins and see who we can build in around it until the rest of the team gets a little bit more filled up. All right, I want to pull up something. I need to pull up my tracker here. Did I miss anybody? Danielle Hunter, Al Shire, Mike Ford, Lonnie Johnson, Des King is back. Lonnie Johnson specifically cited Des King as a guy who learned and came back a second time around and was a different player. I almost feel like maybe they talked to Lonnie Johnson specifically about that. But Lonnie, didn't take a lot of snaps on defense last year. I think he was mostly a special teams player for the Saints. What one veteran player told me when Lonnie was here was that Lonnie sometimes I think didn't necessarily trust that people had his best interests in mind. And some young guys sometimes have a hard time trusting people, depending on their upbringing or depending on what had happened to them. They just have a hard time trusting. And Lonnie had bounced around to a couple different colleges, and he just didn't accept coaching well. I think from the statement Lonnie made when the Texans re-signed him, it seems like hopefully somewhere along the way, I think the Saints were happy with him and what he did for them. He either got humbled a little bit or realized, like, okay, look, man, some of these people actually like I need to listen to because they actually have my best interest. That coaches always theoretically have your best interest in mind because if you do well, they do well. It's as simple as that. So I'm cautiously optimistic about him. I'm glad that Des King is back because you right now you don't have a starting cornerback, but even if you had a starting cornerback but nobody for the slot, then in the modern NFL you're kind of SOL. So I'm glad he's back, and I'm glad he came back and played so well immediately. Jeff Okudah, I saw somebody the other day say that it was somebody that I respect on Twitter, but he said that he refused to believe that Jeff Okudah suddenly just stopped being good at football. He stopped being good at football as soon as he got drafted into the NFL. I mean, that's the question and concern you always have with either a Phillip Gaines or a Garyon Conley or anybody else who's a first round pick at defensive back and then falls off. It's not that all of a sudden, he was good in the NFL and got bad. I mean, that was kind of like the Des King question because Des King was all pro and then all of a sudden wasn't as good and then he was good again. So like Des King, it's appropriate to have questions like that. With Jeff Okudah, really, I think it's a combination of injuries because he had a couple ugly injuries, but also then just adapting to the pro game. Is there something about being in this scheme or with D'Amico or just in his maturity evolution that he ends up being a lot better this year? There's that chance. I mean, I'm all for taking defensive backs, especially who are former first rounders who didn't quite cut it. It's so hard to find those types of athletes that I'm all for giving those guys a second or a third chance. Wrong system in Atlanta. They can fix Okudah, then we have two top three. Yeah, it's a lot of physical talent out on the field. And I think the other thing too is, as D'Amico has said, the engine of this team is going to be the defensive line. If you have a defensive line that can generate pressure without having to blitz with four guys, then all of a sudden, man, your defensive backs look so much better. And especially if one of those defensive backs is Derek Stingley, when you can either put him on the best receiver or put him on the second best receiver and have the other two guys bracket the best receiver, however you want to shake it. And if maybe he becomes more of a travel corner this year. Remember, I haven't acknowledged D'Amico enough for that because it was the Colts game, right? Or was it the Browns game? The Browns game where D'Amico was asked questions about whether or not he would travel with Amari Cooper. And D'Amico said, like, well, it's just not something we do around here. And it was true up to that point. He hadn't really traveled at all this year. And it was probably one of the best bits of gamesmanship out of D'Amico Ryans this year. Was he acted like there's no way in hell that we're gonna have Derek Stingley travel with whether it was Amari Cooper. Somebody correct me down here. And then he did it. He did it like 70% of the snaps in the playoff game. Didn't do it the first time around when Amari Cooper ended up having like 270 yards or whatever. But that's neither here nor there. A lot of injuries at that point. Let's see. Okay, Okudah comes off his assignment to help in the run game like an elite player. I like the sounds of that, quid pro crypto. I hope there's another D-line signing after we traded Collins. A lot of people coming on asking about why the Texans traded Malik Collins, and they only got a 7th-round pick for him. I think that it's a combination of maybe saving a little bit of money and clearing space on the cap for moves currently or in the future, but they'll only save about $2.5 million this year. They'll save a chunk from next year too, though. I think that with Malik this year, I thought he continued to do a good job getting upfield as a pass rusher, and I've always felt like he's a better pass rusher than maybe the total number of sacks suggest. He's just sometimes he struggles to finish, or sometimes he tries to finish even after the ball's away. Remember 2 years ago he had a boatload of penalties. But I also think that he did a good job anchoring in on double teams and playing the run as best he could. But he's not like a natural stud at that. And that's where I wonder if Eric Armstead or somebody else like that is more of what D'Amico has in mind. I feel like this offseason so far, and looking at this front seven, just with you bringing in Danielle Hunter, so all of a sudden you got two maniacs screaming off the edge. You've got Fadikasi, who I think will be a rotational player, but is a bigger dude at defensive tackle. You've got Danico Autry, who, like, Danico Autry has been kind of what you had hoped Charles Omenihu who would be, I think. He can play inside, he can play outside. He brings a bunch of punch and power to him, but he can also move athletically. So he can play defensive tackle, he can play defensive end. He is a 3-4 defensive end. So in a 3-4, sometimes you're an interior defensive lineman, sometimes you're rushing on the outside. So I think they're going to be able to use him like a jackknife. But I think there's already, when I look at this depth chart for the Texans defensive line, there's more physicality. Like, there's just more blunt force trauma with these guys. So I feel good about that. I feel really, really good about that. How do they have any money after Jones? Jones. I'm either blanking on something or the Kansas City. There must be, Kansas City's. Kansas City. Where I'll play this. Okay, so how do they have any money after Jones? One thing with Kansas City, when you ask how do they have any money, they've done a really good job of drafting. I'll bring this up. The Chiefs, our lads. All right. Let me get you guys this up. All right, so if you look at the Chiefs just running down their roster with like the draft picks they have, Sky Moore, Justin Watson. I mean, not to mention the fact that they've done it with receivers since Tyreek Hill left that are very nondescript. Rashee Rice drafted, their left tackle drafted. Joe Thuney, they got in free agency. Creed Humphrey drafted. Trey Smith drafted. They brought Jawan Taylor over at a discount, but brought him from out. Travis Kelce drafted. Isaiah Pacheco, 7th round, drafted. Their defensive line, everybody was drafted except for Omenihu. Oh, no, and Mike Pennell that they brought over in free agency. Like, they've just Drew Tranquill, brought in free agency, but for what? Like a bag of chips or whatnot. They've got just a boatload of draft picks. And, when you do that, like, this is why I think sometimes when you try to point out that, like, hey, Kansas City doesn't necessarily get super aggressive in free agency, people will say or act or respond like, well, yeah, because they're already awesome. They don't need to bring anybody in. They do it selectively, but most of all, they draft and develop. They do a really good job developing their defensive backs. That's actually one thing that people kind of wondered about. What's his face there? Now I got too many names. L'Jarius Sneed. Is that okay? You get him out of that environment, and is he going to be as good as he was at Kansas City? That's unfair, basically, because there's so many other good players on that Kansas City defense. But like doing what the Texans are doing right now, it's an amped up version of what Nick's done all along, which is signing guys to mostly 1 and 2 year contracts. This year, Alshire gets a 3-year contract. But they're still doing very conservative, even if it's kind of aggressive with a total amount of guaranteed money, kind of conservative measured doses of risk taking. And if you draft well, then you have these veteran guys to A, play and produce for you, but hopefully B, also help develop those guys that you draft. And that's hopefully where they end up going. But that's how, the Chiefs have the money for it, partly because they've got a lot of young guys that they've drafted well. They've got a quarterback that can make do with substandard receivers like they did this year, and they're going to want to try to improve that. But that's where the rookie quarterback window, where you've got this pay bump, I think it's interesting that it looks like the Texans might be taking that and saying, like, yeah, and we're going to build the defense because we feel like we have a quarterback who's already the guy who's going to make people around him better. Because, man, like, I don't want to have a quarterback where I got to go out and trade for wide receivers or sign big name wide receivers just to find out if he's actually any good. Like, do I got to trade for A.J. Brown or I got to trade for Tyreek Hill just to see if my guy is any good? And then when they produce, like Tua, like he produces and he's got all that talent on the field, but then you still have to wonder, like, all right, well, is he actually that good? Because look at all this talent he has on the field. Give me a quarterback that makes the guys around him better, or give him a Joe Mixon to help out. You don't need to spend on the Saquon Barkley. Find me a left guard in the draft, or develop one of these other guys, because you got several other good offensive linemen already out there. Like that's where I think that I believe CJ Stroud is already at that point. We can start treating him that way. Let's see, Bubba. You think we could trade our first and the fourth through seventh pick, and snag both of Carolina or Washington's second round picks at the top of the second? That's too much draft math for me right now, man. Okay, Dan, I'm so mad at how many compensatory picks San Francisco always gets, but we bring in so many free agents, we never get any. Yeah, I think that's one thing. For one, I mean, San Francisco's gotten compensatory picks both for free agents and then also for having coaches that have gone off to be head coaches. So both with Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans, they get a compensatory pick because one of their assistants, minority coaches, went on to be a head coach. Like the new Rooney Rule is, like the new Rooney Rule has been like a rocket ship of effectiveness. And imagine that, like, oh, guys they really like so. And the other part is when you have free agents who leave and go and play well elsewhere, the formula gets kind of complicated. I think the Texans over the last couple of years just haven't had that many good players on their team. Like they haven't had to say goodbye to free agents who then go on and prosper or what have you. So like the formula that goes into it gets like beyond my intelligence level. But hopefully, like with continued success, hopefully, for instance, with Joe Mixon, I saw Lance tweeting about this. Joe Mixon was traded for. So if he leaves as a free agent next year, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters that you didn't pick him up as a free agent or that he wasn't cut. If he leaves next year after a productive year with the Texans, then they could get some compensatory picks there. So, like one of the byproducts of getting better is that you end up losing good players, which at least you get compensatory picks back for. Okay, good question. Is Dameon Pierce going to adapt to the zone scheme this year? I think he's going to bust his ass trying to. And it's tough because there are very few teams in the NFL that don't run a good dose of outside zone. There's teams like the Texans that major in it, but there's just a lot of teams that use the Kubiak-Shanahan system, and those teams are going to tend to have a lot of outside zone. There's just so much that goes into some of the reads and the rules that they have there that I think it was foreign to Dameon Pierce. He said as much to Sean Pendergast and Clint Sterner in the postgame show that one day, that it was just foreign to him. And he didn't know what he didn't know until he got into the season and realized, okay, I just haven't picked up on this offense. What I'm hoping is that with an entire offseason and for him to sit back and reflect on exactly how things did go, that he ends up getting that knack for it, because a lot of it is just understanding exactly where your keys are. And, he's the type of runner that with old school man and gap blocking schemes, when somebody says, hey, there's the 2-hole, and I'm just going to hit it between that center and that guard, you don't have to make that many reads other than just your natural instinctive stuff. On these outside zones, you're trying to see exactly where the hat is of the defensive end and where is the safety and all this other stuff. And you're trying to make one cut and going with confidence. And it's something that, like, he hasn't had enough reps at it to be confident. So I'd say, like, right now I'm 50-50 on whether or not he picks it up or not. The biggest question for me, I think, is after the draft, does some other team look at Dameon Pierce and think, like, well, you know what? Actually, he fits in our system really well, and we'd like to trade for him. Or probably during the draft, team loses a running back that they were targeting and they see Dameon Pierce and just try to trade the Texans for Dameon Pierce. I think if I'm the Texans, I can't operate assuming that Dameon Pierce is going to figure it out. I got to hope that he does, recognize that he's an awesome kid and exactly the kind of guy you want in your locker room, but that you can't just wait forever on it. If a good deal comes up, then a good deal comes up. I guess the cautionary tale here would be JD Martinez. because JD Martinez had fixed his swing and showed up in spring training and, was looking pretty good, but wasn't getting a lot of at-bats. And Jeff Luhnow just, he was a classic, like, well, I just can't wait forever for this guy to figure it out. And they let him go. And then JD Martinez ends up being awesome. Like Dameon Pierce deserves at least a little bit more benefit of the doubt and waiting time than JD Martinez did. I'll say that just because he's already, like, JD Martinez hadn't proven yet that he could be good in Major League Baseball, whereas Dameon Pierce has already shown that, my God, the guy can be damn near electric in the NFL, or Major League Football, as I like to call it. Please address the French resistance level interior offensive line for us. All right, well, the French resistance was actually, like, they're pretty ballsy. I've done enough reading. Like, I've gotten beyond my high school education a little bit on World War II enough to understand that, man, the French just got the absolute crap beat out of them in World War I. Like, just like an absurd level of, and like, I'm not saying that in the bad ways to criticize them. It was that kind of a war. Everybody got their ass kicked. They didn't have a clue about trench warfare. So, like, I can't. And the French really, realistically, like, I guess were naive enough to believe certain peace treaties and whatnot. So I give the French a pass for getting rolled over by, frankly, the first modern methed up army we'd ever seen. The Germans invented methamphetamine, gave it to all their soldiers, along with weapons nobody had ever seen before. And yeah, they rolled into France. But the French resistance deserves some credit, as does Kenyon Green. Because this is why. Kenyon Green is like, he's like, if we were in the trenches, if this is trench warfare, and this was Kenyon Green has been all battered to hell, like, from the day he showed up when he was already overcoming an injury. I think, like, his whole anatomic chain just got completely fucked, excuse my language, and it just was one injury on into another. My hope is that this year, this will be his last chance, but he'll have had multiple months to get himself healthy and to get himself right, and maybe come into camp and do some good things. There were times in his first year that actually went pretty well. It's just he had a good stretch before he got injured, in that Raiders game 2 years ago. And then at the very end of the year, he actually, he had a good outing versus Chris Jones at the end of the season. So it's there. He's shown that he can do it. It's just, can he stay healthy? So I'm giving him one more chance on that. Juice Scruggs, I'm still optimistic that he's going to be a center. I think he's meant to be a center and not a guard. Just looking at him out there at guard, like if you want to go watch some Danico Autry highlights, he has a couple of fine snaps versus Juice Scruggs at guard, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. I don't think Juice Scruggs is meant to play guard. I think he's meant to play center. Research biblical cosmology. I will not research biblical cosmology. I don't even know what this is in reference to. What the hell is everybody talking about today? Germans on both bath salts are a formidable force. Yes. Do you think we'll add a player or two to the O-line? Okay, honestly though, as far as offensive line, when I look at the depth chart right now, remember the Texans played almost the entire season last year with at least 3 backup offensive linemen and sometimes 4. But I feel good about Titus Howard at right tackle. I don't feel good about Titus Howard at left guard, but I think people realize he's a right tackle. I think he's still got upside there, but a solid enough right tackle. I feel good about Laramie Tunsil at left tackle if he could stay on sides. Or if he could run block more consistently, but some of that has to do with the left guard. Center and left guard are the real positions that, so if you go back and you got Shaq at right guard, I feel stable enough on the right side. I feel good about my left tackle. The left guard and the center are really everything there. If you went to free agency right now, there's actually, let's see. I like the Athletic free agency tracker. It's a little bit, a lot of it's based on Randy Mueller, the former GM, his power rankings. So some of that you could argue about where guys are in the power rankings, but they do a really good job of filtering everything by still available and position and everything. So the guard, who did I see? Oh, Kevin Zeitler. I saw that Kevin Zeitler was still available. Isaiah Wynn. Laken Tomlinson, Sua Opita, who I'm guessing is Polynesian. If we could get even more Polynesians on the roster after already signing one, I'd be all for that. Mark Glowinski, like it wouldn't surprise me if they sign a guard. Except that I wonder if Nick thinks, man, if we're going to give Kenyon Green a chance, if we're going to give Patterson a chance, if we're going to give Juice Scruggs a chance, and if that does work out, do I want to pay for a Kevin Zeitler right now, or do I want to just play that game again of maybe finding out what we have? Like they've got to one of those two positions. Like you got to have one of those guys work out. Juice Scruggs or Patterson at left guard or Kenyon Green at left guard. Like one of those guys has to work out because we already saw how hard it was to fill guys in. I'm good if they sit where they are right now and see what happens in the draft. But it's obviously not perfection right now. Like they've just got to trust their system a little bit more. Okay, any chance we go for a player like Simmons? I think there's a chance they go for Simmons. I'll be surprised just because there's such a glut of guys available at safety right now. So Justin Simmons is the cream of the crop in terms of guys that are still available. But you've got Kyle Duggar there. You've got Marcus May, Julian Blackman, Rayshon Jenkins, Quandre Diggs. Quandre Diggs, I appreciate the local ties or the Texas ties. The thing that would make me nervous about him right now is that he showed the signs of starting to age last year, and it's not like he's super old or anything. But I've been saying, they've brought on so much age, and like Jimmy Ward, they already have, who's an aging guy in the secondary. If you bring in another aging guy, then you've got your concerns that at least one of those guys isn't in time. Really, I think a lot of it right now hinges on how they genuinely feel about Jalen Petrie. The one guy to keep an eye out for, honestly, is Tashawn Gibson. Because I remember watching Tashawn Gibson with the 49ers 2 years ago when D'Amico had him. And like, man, all right, the guy's running around. He's making plays. Let's see what Randy Mueller says about Gibson from this last year. Yeah. Gibson has been a revelation for the 49ers since they signed him during the 2022 preseason following Jimmy Ward's injury. That'd be ironic if we brought him back in, partly because of Jimmy Ward's injuries. But the Niners retained Gibson for $2.9 million last season, with Hufanga rehabbing from a torn ACL. Another one-year deal might make sense if Gibson chooses to continue playing. He's 34 years old. My God, I didn't realize Tashawn Gibson was 34. So age concerns, yes, but and I would say this with Justin Simmons too. The safety market is so flooded right now that maybe they make a go at Justin Simmons. I think I'm expecting it more to be a guy that's not as much of a name as Justin Simmons, because I think he believes in Jimmy Ward when he's healthy, and I think D'Amico probably believes in Jalen Petrie. He just needs Jalen to just figure this particular defense out. There's a question from the text line this morning that I wanted to get to. Oh, about Alshire, Aziz Alshire. Alshire. It's not pronounced Alshire. It's Alshire or Alshire. Somebody asked how far he is off from Patrick Queen. I think there's a couple of reservations about Patrick Queen that I had, and I still think he's awesome. I think he'll be good in Pittsburgh, but now I'll focus on the negative now that the Texans obviously aren't going to get him. The one reservation that I'm on record as saying multiple times with Patrick Queen and Christian Harris side by side, if you had both those guys playing the Mike and the Will, neither of those guys seem to do great when they're the signal caller. And you need one of those two guys to be your signal caller, to wear the green dot, the guy that stays out on the field and is there in nickel and everything. Those guys both seem to play better right now, at least when they don't have to do extra thinking, when they can just focus on their job and play downhill. Where Alshire he's been the signal caller. He's played Sam in D'Amico's defense. He's played Mike and Will in D'Amico's defense. Like, he's got all that versatility that you want. And I think that's probably what D'Amico really likes about him. I think the other part about Alshire compared to Patrick Queen, this isn't a negative or a positive, but I think Alshire is more of like a naturally physical, old school linebacker. I think he's much more likely to hit you in the chin than uses athleticism, even though he's got a ton of athleticism. So there's that. Like Patrick Queen might be the rangier, longer, more physically talented overall guy. Alshire was an undrafted rookie free agent, I believe. when the 49ers took him. So it's kind of a self-made, gritty guy, and not one better than the other, but just it might be a better fit. That's why the two kids, Luvu and Alshire, I thought might be better fits just from a play calling perspective. So I think that's a good fit for those guys in a good mold. Somebody had also asked how he fits in with Christian Harris, how he's different than Blake Cashman. I think, again, the physicality side of it. I think that Blake's a very smart player, and he's very talented and fast as hell and good in coverage, but doesn't necessarily have as much of the old school physicality of a linebacker. So again, that's where I think D'Amico probably really likes Alshire. And D'Amico's got this prior relationship with them in this defense. Okay. Discussion on another channel was that Petrie at nickel would be best for him based on his college play. Yeah, I think I like Nickel's nickel. Like Nickel's deep, like that's playing man on super fast. That's like locking down Tank Dell in coverage. And I don't think he's that guy. I think no, unless you mean nickel linebacker. If you mean nickel linebacker, that's a whole different scenario. And I think that's that's more along the line of what he did in college. I don't know exactly how much D'Amico wants Jalen to be that guy without also still first grasping every other part of the defense, because it's a lot, man. When you start moving that safety around and he's kind of your joker type of guy, like he's got to have everything nailed down about what he's seeing from the offense. And there's times where this last year Jalen still looked overly aggressive in some ways. For a guy that's got I think a very good football IQ, I think there's certain maybe a part of his temperament he needs something, because he's got the smarts. And I think sometimes it's the temperament of a safety, of kind of understanding when and where to pick your battles, like when you got to be a deep guy, when you can come up and be a head basher. I think some of that is still part of the maturation process for Jalen. And I think maybe kind of like D'Amico said, he looked at last year like Christian Harris's rookie year. I think maybe you got to go back and look at last year like Jalen Petrie's rookie year in some sorts, because his actual rookie year, he really just got to run around a lot and make tackles or miss tackles. Like he made a lot of tackles, but he missed a boatload as well. And he also had to do it like in a situation where the front seven wasn't putting up much of a fight at all. So he never got a really good and genuine look at how you're supposed to play safety in a good defense. And I think this year may have been just a really good education for him. Let's see. Thanks for the answer about Alshire, Seth. It seems like we may have gotten better value than what we've gotten from Queen at his price. Yeah, and Queen didn't get as much as I think a lot of people anticipated he was. Oh, yeah, that was the other part about Queen, was it seems like he really picked it up when Roquan Smith got there. So, like, as positive as I am about Christian Harris and as optimistic as I am, he's not Roquan Smith quite yet, So I don't know if, and that this feels, even as I'm saying it and it's coming out of my mouth, it feels like sour grapes. Like this, but I'll say it because why the hell not? But it feels a little bit like sour grapes. Like, I don't even know if he's even a good linebacker. Like, he's a damn good linebacker. And he's got, I guess, more potential upside theoretically based on his athleticism. But like as D'Amico has said, there's so much to say for knowing who a guy is as a person and when times are hard, and also having seen him in your specific system while the guy is still young and in his prime. Sometimes I worry if a coach brings in players that he used to have in previous places, if those players are also old, because, we saw that here. Mike Sherman brought in an offensive lineman in Kubiak's first year that I think he's a good guy, but he was past his prime. And I think the team didn't really realize that. Not to mention the running back that had been with Mike Sherman. Sometimes that can be dicey. With Alshire, he's 27 years old, so I don't worry about that part of it. I think he's going to be just fine here and help out a lot. How do you feel about Jeff Okudah? I know he's a huge bust with Detroit, but I heard he improved with Atlanta. Yeah, and in Atlanta, I know injuries derailed him a little bit. I'm cautiously optimistic. Like, he's obviously got physical upside, and he's had a couple of rough injuries that have slowed him down. I think that in this defense in particular, now that DeMeco's building it in his own image, like what he said that he wanted to do, he said, we're going to spend resources on that. He said the defensive front. At the time, I kind of thought he was talking about the front seven, not just the defensive line. But he's done both. Like, so I guess we don't have to debate about it. But I mean, he went out, he's gotten 2 impact defensive linemen. So if you got Danico Autry with his 11.5 sacks last year, you've got Danielle Hunter, who had, was it 12.5 or 14, whatever many sacks he had last year. He's been double-digit sacks in 3 of the last 4 years, maybe 4 of the last 5 years. Just been in the 1 year he didn't, it was because he was injured. He was on pace for like 16 sacks that year. He's just been incredibly consistent and productive, and relatively injury-free, other than the 1.5 season that he missed. So, like, you're bringing in immediate production. I think you can dial that up. Alshire makes them better. I think there's still one linebacker spot where maybe Henry To'oTo'o takes a step forward this year. Maybe, Jake Hansen doesn't have ideal size or anything, but he's a guy that might stick around. But either in the draft or in free agency, there's still room for that. But I say all that to tell you, playing opposite of Derek Stingley and then hopefully and ideally having a really fierce pass rush, that makes it a lot easier for that second cornerback position. So I think, they'll see what they have with Jeff Okudah. I don't think there's any part of you that should depend on Jeff Okudah right now. I think there's a chance Steven Nelson comes back. And this will be the tricky part. I think like Steven Nelson's already demonstrated that he's not above complaining publicly so when he's not happy with his contract. And he did that after 1 year with the Texans. But then he came back and he was like voted captain and played really well this year. I thought it was crucial that the Texans let him test free agency, because the last thing you want is for him to accept the deal that he thinks that he actually could have done better on in the free agency market, and then resent the Texans or be tweeting pictures of vests or DeMeco's bald head or something like that, taking his little pot shots. So maybe he comes back into the fold now, and I'd feel good with that. 16.5 sacks last year for Danielle Hunter. God, I apologize. I underestimated by an extreme degree. The one thing with so Ethan, thank you for that, by the way. The one thing about Danielle Hunter that makes me really excited in comparison to the production that you got out of John Grenard, there's one thing that I can recite just off the top of my head, which is that he played 90% of the snaps for the Vikings last year. Like he goes and goes and goes. And you see by his physique, he does not suffer for conditioning. I believe he runs all his wind sprints. But when you look at like total QB pressures, last year he had 80 total QB pressures. Because as we all know, sacks are nice, sacks are important, but trying to use sack totals in one particular year, they don't really tell you the whole story a lot of times, because like in one individual year, a guy might get a lot of sacks and be a little bit lucky on it. Maybe he didn't get that many pressures. So I like to look at total QB pressures from year to year to get a good feel for exactly like how much a guy is doing. There's still a skill part involved in getting to the actual sack. But if you look at John Grenard, like last year he had 48 total pressures. In his career, he's got 92 total quarterback pressures. So over the course of 4 seasons, he's missed games due to injury and everything else. Over the course of 4 seasons, he had 92 QB pressures. Danielle Hunter had 80 in this season alone. Danielle Hunter in his total QB pressures, in his healthy seasons, in his last 4 healthy seasons, so 3 of his last 4 seasons, he's been healthy the whole time. He's had a 70 QB pressures, 80 QB pressures, and 88 QB pressures. So, like in that one season, he had as many as Grenard has had his entire career. So it's just a completely different level of production. And then you add Danico Autry to that too, who again by QB pressures has been incredibly consistent. They've upgraded. Like the only concern is that Danico Autry and Danielle Hunter are both in their 30s, but that's why they get the short-term contract. And I totally 100% think that was a masterstroke by both DeMeco and Nick. Like I feel like the risk envelope here is exactly what I'm comfortable with. You're being aggressive, but it's in short bursts. Somebody this morning had asked, and it's a good question. Somebody had asked, does he have a plan for replacing these guys when their contracts are up? So that's part A of that question. And somebody else immediately after had asked, Like, is this going to hurt team chemistry when you have this many guys rolling through? Both very good questions. One is, how do you replace these guys? I think the answer is basically you go out and you find another guy like Danielle Hunter, you find another guy like Alshire, you find another guy like Danico Autry, whoever those. And Alshire is like long term by Nick standards because he's 3 years. But with these guys on 1 and 2 year deals, you go out and find them. And then the second question is, does this hurt team chemistry? That's where I think that it's vital and preferable sometimes in some ways that these are the deals you're using on your 30-year-olds, because those guys, like, who they are by then. Like a guy doesn't become a locker room cancer all of a sudden at the age of 31. Okay, I take that back. There's times, but it's rare when somebody becomes a cancer at the age of 34 or 35. Like Ed Reed was a whole different scenario. Ed Reed was like the aging superstar who went from an incredible situation to a bad situation. And sometimes there's just no accounting for how those guys are going to react. I think with these other guys, I feel really good about knowing how they're going to react. And that's part of the team chemistry part of it. And then, in football more so than in basketball, because I've had the same reservation about the Daryl Morey Rockets when there's just so much churn all the time. Football, there's just more numbers involved. So there's constant churn amongst your role players and everybody else all the time. This is the way they operated in New England. Their free agency deals were a whole lot of 1 and 2 and sometimes 3-year deals for the 20 years that Nick Caserio was there. And I think he's very comfortable in this world. As long as you're getting the right guys and bringing them in, and as long as you have D'Amico and his influence, I don't worry about the chemistry part of it. Let's see. Two-way said, I didn't hear anything about that. About what, Tutway? Damn it. I can't go on this chase. Justin Simmons already signed with the Titans yesterday. Tutway, tell me what you're talking about, man. Let's see. And tell me exactly, did Simmons officially go to the Titans? I thought they were zeroing in on him. Somebody clear that up for me, because on my tracker, there's too much going on here. I'd feel really, really stupid if that were the thing that I messed up. Eric Armstead, Simmons, nobody seems pumped. Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport haven't confirmed that about Simmons. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, he's not signed there yet. You derailed the live stream, damn it. Don't derail my live stream. I'm in a groove. I feel good. This is the best I've felt. I think on the thumbnail, what did I put? Like officially a serious football team or something like that? We sat through the first 6 hours of free agency. My God, it was so hard for me to bite my tongue. And I stayed off Twitter for the most part, because the same thing happens every year where people they're so dialed in on it. It's like when you're watching the stock market too closely, and every single person that leaves to another team, or everybody that you thought you might have wanted, it feels like you are losing free agency and it's slipping through your fingers. That's why I am eternally grateful to have a guy like Nick, who's like kind of almost maybe cyborg and doesn't have the emotional fluctuations that other people might have. I think you got to have the fortitude to be able to sit there and watch a player that maybe you really liked, but you said, I'm not going to spend more than a certain amount on him. And if another team wants to go for him, then I'm going to let him go. They set a hard price. If it's true that they had set 3 years, $11 million per year as their price for Barkley, and Barkley ended up leaving for more money elsewhere, if that's true, if that part of the story is true, you got to admire him, because, this is a lesson I learned in house hunting. Like, you used to go and, my wife and I would go look at houses, and you find one that you fall in love with, but it's out of your price range, and you're trying to set that price range. Or you find one that's like the perfect one, and you get in a little bit of a bidding war, and you think like, oh, that was the perfect house. That was the perfect damn house. Here's the thing about the housing market. There's always new houses coming up for sale. And that's likewise with free agency or players in the NFL. I think Nick understands that, man, if you get too emotionally attached to one target, you end up going outside of your boundaries and your parameters for a guy that, frankly, there's going to be another one of 6 months down the line or a year down the line. And you just got to learn to have that patience. I tell you that story about the housing market, not because I ever actually learned my lesson, but I'm aware that someday I need to learn that lesson. I still act on my impulses. That's why I respect Nick so much for not buying extra. Like, what the hell do I need those extra bathrooms for? It's ridiculous. It's stupid. I don't currently speak for any realtors. Let's see. Running back is probably one of the worst positions to overpay for now. Yeah, and especially with the running back is one of the worst positions to overpay for. One of the problems is that it's a position where the difference in impact between the very best guys and the commodity guys just isn't what it used to be. And I think part of that is, and this is one of the reasons that I like Derrick Henry so much. Like like Adrian Peterson may have been the last running back who really carried his team to the playoffs. People try to say that Saquon Barkley did a couple of years ago, but Saquon wasn't even good in the second half of the season. And like there was a lot more to it than just Saquon on that offense and that team in general. Like Adrian Peterson made the quarterback there, actually look like a viable NFL quarterback. Adrian Peterson also was durable as hell, and he led the league in rushing at the age of 31, playing with a sports hernia. Like, that's how good he was and durable he was. That's why I like Derrick Henry, because he's so durable. If running backs want to start getting paid more, play more football. Like, be good longer. There's just so many of them that are just glass Joe out there on the football field. No matter how they look physiologically, you can't trust that they're going to stay healthy. You know, except for the very few, whether it's Curtis Martin or Adrian Peterson, or frankly Derrick Henry these days. You can't trust, and I feel like if you can trust that a guy, if you had more guys that would, for one, wear bigger pads, like Eric Dickerson, go look at his shoulder pads, kids. Wear shoulder pads like him. Wear big, stupid thigh pads. Wear a face mask that's just way overkill. I get tired of seeing running backs injured all the time. When meanwhile, like Curtis Martin, who was one of the most durable running backs ever, basically had himself covered from head to toe with athletic tape and polyurethane. It's so anyway, rant over. Your stupid little running backs guild. Need more O-line hope. Like, seriously, we need hope. Ruth, I think you came on after I would have talked about this before. I'll just give you the quick recap of it. I think they are fine at left tackle, right tackle, and right guard. Center and left guard are the huge positions. And anything you think about the offensive line, you got to remember that they were playing with 3 backups for most of last season. You had a backup at right tackle, you had a backup at left guard, you had a backup at center. And some of those were 3rd and or 4th options. So it was an extreme a patchwork situation. I think you get better immediately with Titus Howard at right tackle, even though George Fant did very, very well. Left guard and center are the spots, and you've got 3 young guys at least that are fighting it out there. I think bringing in one veteran who can play both center and guard would probably be a really good idea right now, but I don't know how high it is on their priority list. Like, they got to have some faith that between Patterson, Scruggs, and Kenyon Green, if he can stay healthy, that at least one of those guys will work out, and then maybe have some competition for other places. Let's see. Chase Young to DT. Oh, I would not like that at all. I don't think he's psychologically built for that. Running back scared to get hit, always looking for the next hit coming. It's one of my objections about Saquon Barkley. I'm on record with this. This is not sour grapes. And I don't know. I'd go more in depth to this on the radio than I do on the live stream. Saquon Barkley has worked on getting vertical faster and not trying to be such a Goldilocks who's only looking for the perfect situations. But there's still that element to his game that I don't like his percent successful rushes. So on first down, if you make it at least 4 yards, on second down, depending on like how far you are to the sticks, making a certain percentage, they judge it whether it's a successful rush or not. If you look at a guy like Derrick Henry compared to a guy like the percent successful rushes is just way, way, way higher with Derrick Henry. Saquon Barkley has very much been a boomer bust guy. Like, it's when everything is right, when the blocking is perfect and there's a hole there, he can absolutely destroy you. But then there's a lot of other instances where he's not he's getting minimal yardage because things aren't perfect. And I think he's still that guy. That's what would scare me off of paying a guy like that. That's why I like Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and some of these other guys better. And I like Joe Mixon a lot. Like, we haven't talked about Joe Mixon in a little while since the very beginning of this. Joe Mixon will put his shoulders down. He's maybe like too much to an extent. Like, he doesn't have that incredible balance. If you think about, like, remember Terrell Davis was just incredible at almost like being horizontal to the ground, and he'd be able to lift one of those legs back up and right himself up. Joe Mixon isn't quite there, but he's a 1,000+ yard carrier who's going to churn out and grind out yardage for you. And I still think he's young enough to expect productivity out of him this year. Somebody earlier had asked, whether he might start agitating for another year on his contract. I doubt it, just because he took a pay cut last year. And as far as I could tell, it wasn't with a bunch of complaining or anything like that. I think he just kind of understood the situation, and he understands where he is right now as a running back. I think what you hope for him is that he looks at this as a prove-it year, that if he can get a bunch of touches and still be very productive, he either gets another or elsewhere coming out of here. I think a positive about right now is I think teams are starting to look at the Texans as, okay, this is a guy where maybe I can go and do like what Tyrann Mathieu did with the Texans a few years ago. I can rehab my image a little bit, get a really good, solid year of play, and then maybe the Texans re-sign me, or maybe I go somewhere else. Dalton Schultz is another good argument for that. Hey, to kind of took a gamble on the Texans before they even had a quarterback, and performed really well. Oh, Hunter Renfrow. I thought I would get more questions about Hunter Renfrow. Before you get excited about Hunter Renfrow, just go check out his last couple of years and then ask, and then read a few articles. And I got to go watch some film on him later, but he fell off the face of the earth. And I think the convenient explanation last year, 2 years ago in 2022, was that, well, it's Josh McDaniels. I don't know. He doesn't know what he's doing with Hunter Renfrow. This year, same thing. And then people wondered after Josh McDaniels got fired whether maybe he'd be out of somebody's doghouse and take off. But he had receiving 2 years ago. This past season, he had 200 some yards receiving. If you can get him at a discount, and if you think you know what the issue is and how you can get him back to where he used to be in 2021, that would be awesome. I just don't know if. Plus, I'm a little soured on Clemson guys right now. I was gonna forego the Clemson souring if Christian Wilkins had come here, but I've got no need to anymore. Let's see. Hunter sucks. Or socks. Either Hunter sucks or sucks. Either way. Let's see. Fant wants starting money. George Fant. Yeah, George Fant's another one that was good. The Texans were good for him, and I didn't think after training camp or after the first couple times I saw him in training camp, I didn't think it was going to be a very pretty situation. Once he got his legs underneath him, he was fine. I think that I would imagine Fant might sit out there a while and just weigh the circumstances. If there's somebody out there that wants to bring him in and he has a genuine chance to start, it would make sense for him to go there. I think starter money could mean a lot of things, but at his age and given his track record over the last few years, I'll be surprised. I'm not ruling it out completely, but I'll be surprised if somebody commits to him like a starter. But he might have a better situation there. It would be really nice to get him back. Oh, the other one too. Derek Barnett. Has anybody heard anything about Derek Barnett? Because he's another one of these guys that came in, was like in Philadelphia, they thought he was just completely done for. And he came here, and one of the things that drove Philly people incredibly crazy was that Derek Barnett was producing like a monster. And that was as like the Philadelphia defense was really. I think he's another guy kind of like George Fant that might end up being back in the fold, or he uses it to bounce somewhere else. Like those guys already. Okay, as far as we have interest in Eric Armstead since we're on the defensive line here now. I would 100% believe that they're interested in Eric Armstead. Eric Armstead is coming off of knee surgery, and he's been banged up quite a bit over the past 2 seasons. He's in his 30s, and the Texans have brought on a couple guys in their 30s already so far in the offseason. I think it's going to have to be at the right price. I don't think it's completely unrelated to the Texans trading away Malik Collins, but I think part of that is that I think Malik might not quite be the anchor in the run game that DeMeco wants, where Eric Armstead would be. I just don't know if we're going to see a tit for tat. So the draft, unless new details have emerged, the trade of Malik Collins to the 49ers was for a 7th-round pick. It wasn't for Eric Armstead or anybody like that. But pending a physical and everything else, I wouldn't be surprised if Eric Armstead shows up here. I just don't know if it's going to be on super, super fast. Oh, yeah, they might re-sign Rankins too. Rankin's another guy. Okay, so let's see. In terms of the guys who are on 1-year contracts who might return, or short-term contracts that might return, that I've got a tendency to forget about, we've got Sheldon Rankins. We've got, and again, like Sheldon's not as much of an anchor, but he's also very good getting upfield, and he might be less money than Malik Collins. I think Malik was clearing up a little bit of space right now, and maybe thinking that he wasn't an ideal fit, so maybe you just clear up that money for next year as well. Sheldon Rankins, Steven Nelson, who was on a short-term contract but still might be back. George Fant. Yeah, I think there's a lot of those guys. I'd say at least half of those guys are probably back. Hunter Renfrow fumbled all the time. Tiny hands. Yeah. Nothing on him yet. Mike chipping. Is my mic chipping or is Mike somebody else's? Does that mean something? Tell me, oh my God. I don't know the parlance of the youth. Yeah, Barnett was really good, man. Oh, the other part too of the Titans. So one of my dreams was to I was going to tell you Johnny Newton. I don't know, like I'm going to have to do a whole separate. I like Johnny Newton in the draft a lot, and maybe he's available by the time the Texans draft, maybe not. But one of my little like accessory goals was to piss off the Titans as much as possible, and I thought that Derrick Henry would be nice. Like there was a big emotional response from Titans fans about like finally losing Derrick Henry. Like when they realized, like, holy crap, it's really happening. They were really upset about it. That was awesome. And I'm glad that more and more people in Tennessee are on computers these days, so I could see that. So good for you, Tennessee. This TVA finally got around to helping you guys out with some computers. But I read an article from right before free agency from one of their, I think it was their SB Nation Titans blog, that specifically identified Alshire and Danico Autry as the guys that they didn't want to lose on the team. They assumed that Derrick Henry was gone, but Alshire and Danico Autry are the two guys that had just been so steadily productive and just like physical forces that they kept things together a lot. You go watch the highlights of both those guys, and the physicality is what sticks out to me. Like they can play. They can play heavy. They can play athletic. You know, Danico Autry can play inside and outside. I feel really, really good about them. Like I feel like this year the defense, though they made strides last year, I think this year they've got a chance to really look like the defense that DeMeco wants, where teams feel pretty sore the day after playing them. Like they get up, like you remember what he had said at the pep rally last year. Like he wants guys to feel it the next morning after they play the Texans. I feel like they're going to be more of that this year. And it might end up being a 3-year process, but we'll see who else. Sorry, guys, I skipped a bunch of comments here, so I'll try to get to it. Fadakasi. Oh, the ideal defensive tackles that people were asking about. Yeah, 7th-round pick seems like a low price for a quality DT in his prime, or am I wrong? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I think the contract may have been an obstacle. I was surprised that they gave him the contract they did last year, even though I like him as a player. But you're right. Like I don't know what's we gotta. Thank you for asking the question, because I mean I think I'm being a little too dismissive of the fact that they just dumped him off for a 7th rounder. They gain a little bit of cap space. It's like $2.5 million. So maybe there was more than meets the eye there, but I'd be surprised if there were any kind of issues, after having already also extended him during June of last year during minicamp. But maybe more details will emerge on that. Let's see. How are you liking DeMeco as your head coach? This is from Niners Gang. Oh, good question, Niners Gang. We freaking love him. Like Niners Gang. Like, to be clear, I'm biased. I played with DeMeco Ryans. He was a rookie in my last year in the NFL. So I didn't get to play with him that much because I blew my knee out early in the season. But like from the very get-go, it was clear. Like that's why we called him Cap his rookie year, because he had that level of maturity about him. And we love him, man. Like he's everything that I think we could have hoped for, especially in a defensive coach. The biggest thing, Niners Gang, if you're still here, I want to tell you this about DeMeco that I think went underappreciated and people wouldn't have realized it around the league. I don't know if I've ever seen a rookie coach, whether he be offensive or defensive minded, have fewer game management issues. Like when it came to clock management, decision making, asking for reviews, it's fewer than on one hand. Like 2 jump to mind, 3 possibly, of like instances where we were really questioning whether it was the right decision in game. And none of them were super egregious. So like you compare that to say Andy Reid, how he was for his first 15 years in the league, or like various previous Texans coaches. There were so few game management issues. It was almost eerie and kind of freakish. And I think in some ways, like as much as people like to point out the shortcomings of defensive coaches, I do wonder if part of it is that, the really crucial game management decisions tend to be made when the offense is on the field. And DeMeco can focus on that stuff instead of the offensive play calling when he's looking at that. And I think he works with Nick really well on that. Matt Burke, the defensive coordinator, was actually a game management specialist for the Jets a couple of years ago. So they have multiple people in the building and in the process that I think understand how to have the right amount of input, what advice to give to DeMeco, and to have him so calm, cool, and collected all the time. Like there are instances this year where you could start to see DeMeco get a little PO'd. The first Browns game was one of them. The Colts game. There were like a couple instances. That was it. We love him, man. We love him. We absolutely love him. You guys could have won a Super Bowl if he was your defensive coordinator. I'm joking. I don't know what's Steve Wilkes, whatever. I don't know. Let's see. Devin White. Yeah, because what's his name there? Levante David re-signed. Who else is still out there? Let me double check this. After our Justin Simmons scare from earlier, I don't want to be putting out misinformation. I'm not a journalist, but still. All right. These are the linebackers, the off-ball linebackers still. Oh, yeah, Bobby Wagner is still available. Like, Bobby Wagner is still productive. Devin White, Chris Barnes. Like, Devin White, I would prefer over Bobby Wagner at this point. Can you get him on a discount? And how old is he? He's 26. Devin White's only 26. God, it feels like he's been around forever, I guess, just because they had that Super Bowl run while he was there. Yeah, that'd be a good option. I'm like crossing my fingers about Henry To'oTo'o. Sometimes I struggle when I watch him in space and some of the angles he takes to the tackle. I'm not so sure about him. Maybe he was just a little bit overwhelmed in his first year. So I'm still holding out hope for Henry To'oTo'o. Titans are so mad at the Ravens. Yeah. Is Amy Adams hot? Amy Adams or Amy Adams Strunk? Oh, my mic does cut out sometimes. Does that happen a lot, Luminaire? It sometimes goes out. I wonder if this is a StreamYard thing, because the internet should be good. My plugs are all in. Oh, well. I apologize for that. Remember the early days of this channel? I had a hard time even getting the microphone to work. I think half the time I recorded it ended up being my computer mic. Shout out from Edmonton. All right, Aditya. I saw a disturbing video on social media yesterday out of Edmonton. It was somebody. It was a guy I was honestly shocked to see such rude behavior out of somebody with a Canadian accent. But there's this guy at this McDonald's window who's like berating the poor girl at the poor cashier because he's demanding a refund, making all kinds of claims that sounded kind of sketchy. But then when she would try to give him the refund on the debit card that he used, he was insisting that no, he wanted cash back. He refused. Oh, he was pissed off because they asked him to go wait up in the waiting area, and he was like threatening to call the McDonald's managers that he knows and are friends of his and everything. And it turns out he was from Edmonton because his girlfriend, of course, asked, "What kind of an accent is that, eh? You don't even sound like you're from here, eh? Why don't you go back to where you're from?" And that's when I realized they were Canadian. And then he said he was from Edmonton. I was shocked. I just wanted to let you know that you should get rid of that guy because you guys are largely a fun bunch. But a shout out from Edmonton. Loud clicking noise every now and then. Son of a bitch. Good. Video production person. Sounds like a connection with the audio plug. You know what? Hey, video person. Could it also be like I've got a Focusrite, whatever you call it there. You know what I'm talking about. The thing that you plug into, which I guess like I thought at the time when I bought it, it was nice, but I'm guessing it's probably kind of a budget one. Could it just be that? I don't know. Oh, Clowney to the Panthers. 2 years, $11 million. Good for you, Clowney. Awesome. Did we sign anyone this afternoon? Not that I know of. I'm expecting you guys to give me the interface. Thank you. Is it my Could it be my interface? Let me know if it could be my interface. It's a Focusrite interface. That's a budget one. Like I'm out here this is the thing. It's the weakest link, isn't it? There's all this, what I keep learning about. There's all this audio visual stuff. There's always a choke point somewhere, and you can get nicer and nicer equipment. I'm just going to write it in my hand. Interface. I'm going to get a new one, Bubba. And Bubba Homeschool, for some reason, has gotten blocked off of our Sports Radio 610 YouTube a couple times, and I sent your late. I don't know why, Bubba. I don't know why. I don't know if you're using like some word that triggers a block mechanism or something. Like, are you sometimes joking about like hurting somebody? Have you threatened Patrick Creighton? If you threaten Patrick Creighton, there's nothing I can do for you. You're just gonna have to take that up with management at Odyssey or something. Okay, I've got a Shure SM7B, right? The SM7B. So yeah, it sounds like using a Focusrite interface with a SM7B is a low rent move by me. Sounds like an audio cloud. Well, I've also got. Okay, so should the cloud lifter be plugged in better? Do I need to boost it? I know the SM7B is fine. This is a hell. Like I did my research on the microphones. I just was I was too cut rate on the other stuff. Clowney's not signed yet. All right, well, this is just devolving into nothing. But people keep coming in and watching. We're talking mic interfaces and you're still watching. I don't know what to do with this. Like if I start talking, I feel like if I start talking mic interfaces, we're going to get even more people on here. Let me reset this a little bit. Getting a Rode Podcaster Pro. Let me reset this and talk more about mic. Hold on a second. I'm going to write this down too. I need to get a new interface and I need to get a Rode, because then I can play drops and sound a lot easier too, right? Rode Podcaster. Okay. All right. I'm gonna call it an afternoon for now because I need to catch up on exactly who and who did not sign. Been a little too much misinformation here for my liking. A little too much misinformation. If he does go to the Panthers, Clowney, if he does go to the Panthers, as somebody just pointed out, that would be going home to the Carolinas. He had a vape shop there. It started in like his third year, and all of us were like, I don't know if a business venture, especially a vape shop, is the best thing for Clowney to be getting into at this juncture of his career. It wasn't a dispensary or anything. It was just like a vape shop. But I don't know. Oh, it happens when I flail my arms or when I get too close to the mic. Okay. All right. Thank you, Steve. Panthers are just hosting him. Are you coming back on later? I think, Ruth, that I might try. I don't want to make any promises that I don't want to make any promises that I can't keep. But thank you, everybody. And I apologize that I wasn't. I remember like a week ago, I said my goal was to stream every day. It hasn't happened. We knew better than that. You guys that know me know better than that. All right. Thanks for joining, everybody.